The dust devil came out of nowhere, a spinning monster of prairie grit and fury that turned the afternoon sky brown and sent Clara Vance stumbling backward into the arms of a stranger who smelled like leather and wood smoke. "Easy now," the man said, his voice low and steady as he pulled her against his chest and turned his broad back to the wind. His duster coat wrapped around them both like a canvas tent, creating a pocket of stillness in the chaos. Clara pressed her face against his worn cotton shirt, squeezing her eyes shut against the stinging sand that tried to find every gap in their shelter. She could feel his heart beating slow and strong beneath her cheek, an anchor in the storm. The wind howled and screamed for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. When it finally moved on, leaving nothing but settling dust in its wake, the man loosened his hold but did not step away immediately. Clara lifted her head and found herself staring into eyes the color of creek water in summer, green and brown mixed together in a way that made her think of cool shade on a hot day. "You all right, miss?" he asked, and there was genuine concern in his weathered face. He looked to be in his late 20s, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that stuck out at odd angles from where his hat had blown off during the dust devil's assault. Clara nodded, suddenly aware that she was still pressed against this complete stranger in the middle of Riverside's main street. She stepped back quickly, brushing futilely at her dress, which was now the same tan color as everything else in this God-forsaken corner of Kansas. "Yes, thank you." That came up so fast. "They do that out here," he said, retrieving his hat from where it had lodged against the general store's porch. He beat it against his thigh a few times, sending up small clouds of dust, then settled it back on his head. "You new to town?" "I arrived this morning on the stage," Clara said, still trying to process what had just happened. The way he had moved, the instinctive protection he had offered a stranger, it spoke of a kind of decency she had not encountered in a very long time. "I am supposed to start teaching at the school next week." "The new teacher," he said, and something like pleasure crossed his face. "That's good. The kids have been without proper schooling since Mrs. Henderson passed last winter. I am Grant Fairfield. My ranch is about 5 miles north of town." "Clara Vance," she said, and when he extended his hand, she took it. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip careful, as though he was mindful of his own strength. Something fluttered in her chest, a feeling she had taught herself to ignore over the years. Hope was a dangerous thing for a woman with her history. "Welcome to Riverside, Miss Vance," Grant said, releasing her hand after what might have been a moment too long. "I hope that dust devil did not give you a poor impression of our hospitality." Clara managed a small smile. "I have weathered worse storms than that, Mr. Fairfield." Something in her tone must have conveyed more than she intended because his expression shifted, became more thoughtful. Before he could respond, a woman's voice called out from the boardwalk. "Grant Fairfield, are you going to stand there gabbing all day, or are you going to help me with these supplies?" Clara turned to see a plump woman in her 50s standing outside the general store, hands on her hips, but there was affection in her mock severity. Grant grinned and touched the brim of his hat to Clara. "Duty calls. But if you need anything, Miss Vance, anything at all, you just ask around for me. Anyone in town can point you to the Fairfield Ranch." He strode off toward the store, and Clara watched him go, still feeling the phantom warmth of his arms around her, the solid safety of his body shielding hers from the wind. She shook herself mentally. She had come to Riverside to start over, to build a quiet, respectable life teaching children their letters and numbers. She had not come here to develop foolish feelings for the first handsome cowboy who showed her a moment of kindness. But as she made her way to the boarding house where she would be staying, she could not quite shake the memory of his voice, the way he had held her as though she was something worth protecting. The boarding house was run by a thin, nervous woman named Mrs. Talbot, who showed Clara to a small room on the second floor that overlooked the street. It was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a wooden chair by the window. Clara set down her single carpet bag and sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the exhaustion of travel and something deeper, something that had been weighing on her for months. She had left Missouri in the middle of the night 3 weeks ago, fleeing from a situation that had become unbearable. Her stepfather's house had been a prison, his temper a constant threat. And when he had announced his intention to marry her off to a man twice her age who wanted a young wife to tend his children and warm his bed, Clara had known she had to leave. She had saved what little money she could from her sewing work, answered an advertisement for a teacher in a small Kansas town, and lied about her references. She was 22 years old and had never had a place that felt safe, never had anyone who made her feel like she mattered. Until today, when a stranger had wrapped his coat around her and turned his back to the wind. Clara stood and moved to the window, looking out at Riverside's dusty Main Street. It was not much of a town, just a handful of buildings clustered around the road that led west toward Colorado. But it was far from Missouri, far from her stepfather and his cruel hands, and that made it the closest thing to paradise she could imagine. She unpacked her few belongings, hanging her 2 spare dresses in the narrow wardrobe and setting her books on the small shelf above the bed. She had 4 novels, all of them read so many times that the pages were loose in their bindings, and a Bible that had belonged to her mother. Clara ran her fingers over the worn leather cover, remembering the woman who had died when Clara was just 8 years old, leaving her at the mercy of a father who had remarried within 6 months to a woman who did not want a stepdaughter. A knock on the door startled her from her thoughts. Mrs. Talbot stood in the hallway, wringing her hands. "Begging your pardon, Miss Vance, but there is a gentleman downstairs asking after you, a Mr. Fairfield. Says he brought some things he thought you might need." Clara's heart did an odd little skip. "I will be right down." She checked her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand, grimacing at her wind-blown appearance. There was dust in her dark hair, and her face was flushed from the heat and the wind. She did what she could to make herself presentable, then descended the narrow stairs to the boarding house's front parlor. Grant Fairfield stood by the window, his hat in his hands, and when he turned at the sound of her footsteps, that same gentle smile crossed his face. At his feet was a crate filled with supplies. "Miss Vance, I hope you do not think me presumptuous, but I realized after we parted that you might not have had time to stock up on necessities. The general store closes early on Saturdays, and I thought you might need some basics to get you through until Monday." Clara moved closer and looked down at the crate. There were candles, matches, a loaf of bread wrapped in cloth, butter, jam, coffee, and a small sack of sugar. Simple things, but it was the thoughtfulness that made her throat tighten. "Mr. Fairfield, this is incredibly kind, but I cannot accept charity. I have money to pay for what I need." "It is not charity," he said quickly. "Consider it a welcome gift from a neighbor. Besides, Mrs. Henderson was a friend of mine, and I know she would want the new teacher to be looked after properly." Clara studied his face, searching for any hint of the ulterior motives she had learned to expect from men. But there was only sincerity in his expression, a straightforward kindness that made something ache in her chest. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That is very thoughtful." Grant picked up the crate and waited for her direction. She led him back upstairs, acutely aware of Mrs. Talbot's curious gaze following them. In her small room, he set the crate on the chair by the window, then stepped back, maintaining a respectful distance. The school is at the east end of town, he said. Mrs. Henderson used to live in the rooms above the schoolhouse, but the town council thought it might be too lonely for a young woman on her own. If you need any help getting the school ready next week, there are plenty of folks who would be happy to pitch in. I appreciate that, Clara said. She clasped her hands in front of her, unsure of the proper protocol. She had not had many conversations with men who were not trying to control or manipulate her. Grant seemed to sense her uncertainty. He moved toward the door, then paused. Miss Vance, I hope you do not mind me saying this, but earlier when you said you had weathered worse storms, there was something in your voice. If you ever need help, real help with anything at all, I meant what I said. You can count on me. The words were simple, but they landed with the weight of a promise. Clara felt her eyes sting with unexpected tears and blinked them back quickly. I never had a safe place, she heard herself say, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Not really. Not until today when you sheltered me from the wind. The silence that followed was heavy with understanding. Grant took a step closer, his expression serious. You have a safe place now, he said. Riverside may not look like much, but it is full of good people who look after their own. And you are one of us now, Miss Vance. That means something. He left before she could respond, the sound of his boots echoing on the stairs. Clara sank onto the bed, her hands shaking slightly. She had not meant to reveal so much, to let this stranger see the vulnerability she usually kept locked away. But there had been something about the certainty in his voice, the quiet strength in his bearing, that had made her want to trust him. She stood and moved to the crate of supplies, running her fingers over the rough wood. It was such a small gesture, bringing her bread and candles, but it was the first time in years that someone had thought about what she might need, had taken action to help her without expecting anything in return. Clara picked up the loaf of bread and unwrapped it. It was still warm, and the smell of it filled the small room. She broke off a piece and spread it with butter, savoring the simple comfort of fresh food. As she ate, she looked out the window at the prairie stretching endlessly beyond the town, at the big sky that seemed to hold both promise and threat in equal measure. She had come to Kansas looking for a new start, for a chance to build a life free from fear and control. She had not expected to find someone like Grant Fairfield, someone who made her think that maybe, just maybe, safety and kindness were not just things she read about in novels. The next morning was Sunday, and Mrs. Talbot informed Clara that she was expected at the church service if she wanted to meet the town properly. Clara put on her best dress, a simple gray cotton that was presentable if not fashionable, and walked with her landlady through the quiet morning streets. The church was a white clapboard building with a bell tower, sitting on a slight rise at the north end of town. People were gathering outside, families in their Sunday clothes, children running and playing while their parents talked. Clara felt the weight of their curious stares as she approached, knew they were all wondering about the new teacher, judging whether she would be suitable to educate their children. Mrs. Talbot introduced her to a dizzying array of names and faces. There was Reverend Thomas, a kindly man with wire-rimmed spectacles. The mayor, Samuel Granger, and his wife Elizabeth, who looked Clara up and down with sharp eyes. The blacksmith, Henry Cole, and his large brood of children. The doctor, an older gentleman named Richard Stone, who welcomed her warmly. And then Grant Fairfield appeared, walking up the path from town with an older man who moved stiffly, leaning on a cane. The resemblance between them was clear, the same build, the same shape to their faces, though the older man's hair was silver and his features were deeply lined. "Miss Vance," Grant said, genuine pleasure in his voice. "I would like you to meet my father, George Fairfield." "Pa, this is the new school teacher, Miss Clara Vance." George Fairfield extended his hand, his grip still strong despite his evident infirmity. "Welcome to Riverside, Miss Vance. My son tells me you had quite an introduction to our weather yesterday." "Your son was very helpful," Clara said, glancing at Grant. In the morning light, wearing clean clothes and freshly shaved, he was even more handsome than she had realized. She forced herself to look away, focusing on his father. "I hope I did not take him away from important work." "Any work can wait when someone needs help," George said firmly. "That is how we do things out here. We look after each other." The church bell began to ring, calling them to service. Inside, the building was simple but well-maintained, with wooden pews and sunlight streaming through tall windows. Clara found herself sitting near the front, Mrs. Talbot on one side and the mayor's wife on the other. She could feel Grant's presence a few rows back, as though her body was attuned to his in some strange way. Reverend Thomas preached about welcoming strangers and the importance of community. Clara tried to focus on his words, but her mind kept drifting to the man behind her, to the memory of his arms around her, his body shielding hers from the wind. She had been held in anger, in control, in violence, but never in simple protection. The difference was profound. After the service, people lingered outside, socializing in the shade of the cottonwood trees that grew near the church. Clara was immediately surrounded by families wanting to introduce themselves and talk about their children. She learned that there would be about 15 students, ranging in age from 6 to 14. Most had been doing lessons at home or going without since Mrs. Henderson's death, and their parents were eager for proper schooling to resume. Grant waited until the crowd around her had thinned, then approached with a smile. "It looks like you are going to be popular, Miss Vance." "I hope I can live up to their expectations," Clara said. The truth was, she was a good teacher. She had educated herself through reading and had helped teach the younger children in Missouri before her stepfather had forbidden it, claiming it was not proper work for a woman who should be focused on finding a husband. "I am sure you will," Grant said. His father had been drawn into conversation with the doctor and several other men, leaving them with a semblance of privacy. "Would you like to see the school this afternoon? I could walk you over there, show you where everything is kept." Clara knew she should say no, should maintain a proper distance from this man who stirred feelings in her that she could not afford to have. But the hopeful look in his eyes, the genuine offer of help, made her nod. "That would be helpful, thank you." They agreed to meet after the midday meal, and Clara returned to the boarding house feeling lighter than she had in months. Mrs. Talbot made fried chicken and potatoes, and Clara ate in the small dining room with two other boarders, a traveling salesman passing through and an elderly woman who lived there permanently. The salesman tried to engage Clara in conversation, asking personal questions about where she came from and whether she had family. She gave vague, evasive answers and was relieved when the meal ended and she could escape to her room. She changed into a simpler dress and pinned her hair back, then waited by the window until she saw Grant walking up the street. Her heart gave that strange little flutter again, and she pressed a hand to her chest, willing it to calm. She could not afford to develop feelings for this man. She was here to teach, to build a quiet life, to stay unnoticed and safe. Romance had no place in those plans, but when she met him outside and he smiled at her, all her careful reasoning seemed to evaporate like morning dew. They walked east through town, past the row of businesses and houses, toward the small building that served as Riverside School. It was a simple structure, one room with windows on both sides to let in light, and a small bell tower on the roof. Stairs on the outside led up to the living quarters above, where Mrs. Henderson had spent her final years. Grant produced a key and unlocked the door. Inside, the schoolroom smelled of chalk dust and old wood. There were desks arranged in rows, a large slate board at the front, and shelves lined with worn books and supplies. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust, but Clara could see the bones of a good teaching space. "I am sorry about the state of things," Grant said, looking around with a slight frown. "The council has been meaning to get someone in here to clean, but you know how it is. Everyone has their own work to do." "It is fine," Clara said, running her hand along one of the desks. "I can clean it myself. It will give me a chance to organize things the way I want them." She moved around the room, taking inventory. There were slates and chalk, primers and readers, maps on the walls showing the United States and the world beyond. It was more than she had expected, and she felt a surge of excitement at the prospect of teaching here, of shaping young minds and helping them see possibilities beyond the prairie. Grant watched her with an expression she could not quite read. When she glanced at him, he looked away quickly, as though he had been caught at something. "Would you like to see upstairs?" he asked. "The rooms are empty now, but you might want to know what is available if you ever need more space." They climbed the exterior stairs to the second floor. The door was unlocked, and inside were two rooms, one that had clearly been a bedroom and another that served as a sitting area. The furniture was still there, covered with sheets, and dust motes danced in the sunlight that streamed through the windows. Mrs. Henderson was a widow, Grant said, standing in the doorway of the bedroom. "She came here after her husband died in the war. She said teaching gave her purpose, gave her a reason to keep going." "Did you know her well?" Clara asked. "Well enough. She taught me my letters when I was a boy, before my mother died. After that, Pa needed me on the ranch, so my schooling was spotty. But Mrs. Henderson used to lend me books, encourage me to keep reading. She was a good woman." There was real affection in his voice, real grief. Clara understood. Good people who showed kindness were rare treasures, to be mourned when they were lost. "I hope I can be half the teacher she was," Clara said. Grant turned to look at her, his expression serious. "I think you will be exactly the teacher this town needs, Miss Vance." They stood there in the dusty room, the air between them charged with something Clara could not name. She wanted to move closer, to ask him about his life, his dreams, the things that made him smile. She wanted to know everything about this man who had sheltered her from the wind and then kept showing up with kindness and help. But before she could say anything, they heard voices outside. Grant moved to the window and looked down. "It is some of the town council," he said. "I think they are coming to check on the school. We should go down." They descended the stairs to find Mayor Granger, Dr. Stone, and two other men waiting by the schoolhouse door. The mayor looked surprised to see them together. "Mr. Fairfield, Miss Vance." "I did not expect to find anyone here on a Sunday afternoon." "I was showing Miss Vance around," Grant said easily, making sure she knew where everything was kept. One of the other men, a rancher named William Sutton, grunted. "That is council business, Fairfield. No need for you to trouble yourself." There was an edge to his tone that Clara did not like, a suggestion that Grant was overstepping. But Grant just smiled, unruffled. "No trouble at all, Mr. Sutton. I was happy to help. But now that you gentlemen are here, I will leave Miss Vance in your capable hands." He touched his hat brim to Clara, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, a silent message she could not quite interpret. Then he was gone, striding back toward town with his easy, rangy gait. The council men took Clara through the school, explaining procedures and expectations. They told her what she would be paid, $20 a month plus free room at the boarding house, and outlined the curriculum she was expected to teach. They were polite but formal, clearly reserving judgment until they saw her in action. When they finally left her alone, Clara sat at the teacher's desk and looked out at the empty room. Tomorrow, she would begin cleaning and preparing for the start of school. Tomorrow, she would begin building her new life in this small prairie town. But tonight, as she walked back to the boarding house in the golden light of early evening, her thoughts were full of a green-eyed cowboy who had held her safe in the storm and then kept finding reasons to cross her path. The next week passed in a blur of activity. Clara cleaned the schoolhouse from top to bottom, organized the books and supplies, and prepared lessons for students ranging from first readers to young people on the verge of adulthood. People from town stopped by to help, bringing fresh flowers for the teacher's desk, checking that she had everything she needed. The women brought food, casseroles, and pies that kept Mrs. Talbot's kitchen well-stocked, and they peppered Clara with questions about her teaching philosophy and her background. She deflected the personal questions as much as she could, talking instead about education and the importance of learning. Most seemed satisfied with her answers, though she sometimes caught speculative looks, as though people were trying to figure out what secrets she might be hiding. Grant came by twice, once to repair a broken window and once to bring her a crate of firewood for the school stove. Each time, Clara felt that same flutter in her chest, that same pull toward him that she tried to ignore. They talked while he worked, easy conversations about the town, the weather, the students she would soon be teaching. He told her about his ranch, about the horses he raised and the cattle he ran on the open range. She told him about the books she loved, the places she dreamed of seeing, though she was careful not to reveal anything about her past. On Friday afternoon, the day before school was set to begin, Grant appeared at the schoolhouse door with a package wrapped in brown paper. "A gift," he said, looking almost shy, "for your first day of teaching." Clara untied the string and folded back the paper to reveal a beautiful leather-bound journal, the cover embossed with flowers. She ran her fingers over the smooth leather, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Grant, this is too much. I cannot accept something so expensive." "You can and you will," he said firmly. "A teacher needs a good place to record her thoughts and plans. Besides, I wanted you to have something to mark this new beginning." Clara looked up at him, and the warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. "Thank you," she whispered. "This is the kindest thing anyone has ever done for me." Something shifted in his expression, a flash of anger that was not directed at her. "Then people have not been treating you the way you deserve, Miss Vance." She did not know what to say to that, so she just held the journal against her chest and tried to find words adequate to express what she was feeling. Before she could, a voice called from outside. "Grant Fairfield, are you going to help me load these feed sacks, or are you going to stand around flirting all day?" It was the blacksmith, Henry Cole, standing by a wagon loaded with supplies. Grant sighed and gave Clara an apologetic smile. "Duty calls, as always. But I wanted to wish you luck tomorrow, though you will not need it. You are going to be a wonderful teacher." He left, and Clara stood alone in the schoolroom, clutching the journal to her chest. She could not remember the last time someone had given her a gift, especially one chosen with such care. In her stepfather's house, any money she earned from sewing went directly to him, and the few possessions she owned had been scrounged or saved from her mother's belongings. That night she sat at the small desk in her room and opened the journal. On the first page she wrote the date, September 1, 1879, Riverside, Kansas. Then she paused, pen hovering over the paper, considering what to write. Finally, she began. "Today I was given a gift by a man who barely knows me but who has shown me more kindness in a week than I received in years at my stepfather's house. I do not know what to make of Grant Fairfield. He makes me feel things I have taught myself not to feel, makes me hope for things I have learned not to hope for. But when I am with him, I feel safe. I feel seen. I feel like maybe, just maybe, I could have a different kind of life than the one I have always expected. She closed the journal and placed it in the drawer of her nightstand, then prepared for bed. Tomorrow she would begin her work as a teacher. Tomorrow she would prove to the people of Riverside that they had not made a mistake in hiring her. Tomorrow she would start building the quiet, respectable life she had come here to find. But as she drifted off to sleep, her last thoughts were of Grant Fairfield and the way his eyes lit up when he smiled at her. The first day of school exceeded Clara's expectations. 15 children arrived, scrubbed clean and wearing their best clothes, their parents lingering to see how the new teacher would handle the varied group. Clara greeted each student by name, having memorized them from the enrollment list, and assigned them seats based on their age and ability level. The morning was devoted to assessing what each student knew. Some of the older children could read well and do complex arithmetic, while others, especially the younger ones, were starting from the beginning. Clara made notes in her new journal, planning how she would structure lessons to challenge the advanced students while bringing the beginners along. By midday, when she dismissed them for lunch, she felt confident that she could make this work. The children were eager to learn, respectful and attentive. She ate her own lunch at her desk, reviewing her notes and planning the afternoon lessons. After lunch, she taught history and geography, using the maps on the walls to show the children where Kansas fit into the larger nation, where the rivers ran and the mountains rose. She told them about the Louisiana Purchase and the pioneers who had traveled west, about the Native American tribes who had lived on these lands long before white settlers arrived. Some of the older children asked smart questions, and Clara found herself enjoying the intellectual engagement, the challenge of explaining complex ideas in ways that young minds could grasp. When she finally dismissed them at 3 o'clock, several parents were waiting outside to collect their children. They thanked her, expressing satisfaction with the reports their children gave of the day's lessons. Clara stood in the doorway, watching the families walk away, and felt a sense of accomplishment that warmed her from the inside. That looked like it went well. She turned to find Grant leaning against the side of the building, his hat pushed back on his head. Her heart did that foolish little skip again. It did, she said, unable to keep the smile from her face. They are good children, eager to learn. I knew you would be perfect for this, Grant said, straightening. Listen, Pa and I are having dinner at the hotel tonight, and we would be honored if you would join us. It is a local tradition to take the new teacher out for a meal after the first day of school. Clara hesitated. Dinner with Grant sounded wonderful, which was exactly why she should say no. She was already thinking about him too much, already looking forward to seeing him in ways that were dangerous to her peace of mind. But the hope in his eyes, the genuine invitation, made it impossible to refuse. I would like that, she said. Thank you. They agreed to meet at 6 o'clock, and Clara returned to the boarding house to change into her better dress. Mrs. Talbot helped her pin up her hair properly, and the landlady's knowing smile suggested she understood exactly what was happening. That Grant Fairfield is a good man, Mrs. Talbot said as she fastened the last pin. Lost his mother when he was just a boy, and he has been helping his father run that ranch ever since. He works hard, treats people right. Any woman would be lucky to have his attention. Clara met her eyes in the mirror. I am not looking for a husband, Mrs. Talbot. I came here to teach. Sometimes the best things in life are the ones we are not looking for, the older woman said cryptically. The hotel dining room was the nicest establishment in Riverside, with real tablecloths and curtains on the windows. George Fairfield was already seated when Clara arrived, and he stood with difficulty to greet her, leaning heavily on his cane. Grant pulled out her chair with old-fashioned courtesy, and Clara found herself seated between the two men, feeling simultaneously nervous and oddly at home. George Fairfield was excellent company, telling stories about the early days of Riverside, when it was barely more than a trading post and danger from both weather and hostile encounters was a daily reality. He spoke with respect about the various people who had settled the area, including the Kansa tribe that had once dominated the region before being forced onto reservations. "It is a complicated history," George said, his expression somber. "We like to tell ourselves stories about taming the wilderness, but the truth is more troubling than that. This land was never empty, never just waiting for us to claim it. People lived here for thousands of years before we arrived. My own father fought in some of the campaigns against the tribes, and he told me near the end of his life that he was not proud of what he had done, that the orders he followed were unjust." Clara found herself warming to the older man, appreciating his willingness to acknowledge uncomfortable truths. Grant listened quietly, and she realized this was not the first time he had heard his grandfather's story. "It must be difficult," Clara said, "knowing that our presence here came at such cost to others." "It is," George agreed. "But we are here now, and what matters is how we move forward. We can treat people with respect and fairness, honor our agreements, and try to build something good on this land. That is what I taught my son, and what he will teach his children someday." Grant glanced at Clara when his father said this, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. The implication was clear, and she wondered if George had invited her tonight specifically to look her over as a potential daughter-in-law. The food arrived then, roast beef and potatoes with fresh bread, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Clara found herself relaxing, laughing at George's stories and enjoying the easy banter between father and son. It was clear they respected each other deeply, that their relationship was built on genuine affection rather than the resentment and fear that had characterized her own family. After the meal, George excused himself, claiming fatigue. "But you two should take a walk," he said, his eyes twinkling. "It is a beautiful evening, and Grant could use the company of someone who can string more than 3 words together." "Pa," Grant protested, but there was no real heat in it. George patted his son's shoulder and made his slow way out of the dining room. Grant turned to Clara, a question in his eyes. "Would you like to take a walk, Miss Vance? I promise to be a perfect gentleman." Clara knew she should say no, should return to the boarding house alone and maintain proper distance. But the evening was beautiful, and she was not ready to say goodbye to him yet. "I would like that," she said. They walked through the town as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Grant pointed out various landmarks, telling her stories about the people who lived in each house, the history of each building. His love for this place was evident in every word, and Clara found herself seeing Riverside through his eyes, as a community of people working together to build lives in a harsh but beautiful land. They reached the edge of town, where the prairie stretched out endlessly, grass rippling in the evening breeze. Grant stopped and looked out at the horizon, his expression thoughtful. "Can I ask you something, Clara?" He used her first name without asking permission, and she found she liked the way it sounded in his voice. "Yes," she said, though her heart was suddenly beating faster. "What did you mean when you said you never had a safe place? What were you running from when you came here?" Clara had known this question would come eventually, but she still was not prepared for it. She looked out at the prairie, trying to find words that would be honest without revealing too much. "My stepfather was not a kind man," she said finally. "After my mother died, I was a burden he did not want. He tried to marry me off to a man who would have treated me as property, not a person. So I left in the middle of the night and came here." Grant was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was tight with controlled anger. "Did he hurt you?" "Not the way you are thinking," Clara said. "But there are many kinds of hurt, and not all of them leave visible marks." Grant turned to face her fully, and the fierce protectiveness in his eyes made her breath catch. "He will never touch you again. You are safe here, Clara. I give you my word on that." "Why do you care so much?" she asked, the question bursting out of her before she could stop it. "You barely know me. Why have you been so kind?" Grant reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was warm and calloused, and his touch sent electricity racing up her arm. "I knew from the moment I held you in that dust storm," he said quietly. "From the moment you looked up at me with those eyes, something in my heart recognized you. I know it sounds crazy. I know we just met. But I cannot stop thinking about you, Clara. I cannot stop wanting to make sure you are happy and safe and cared for the way you deserve." Clara stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. No one had ever spoken to her this way. No one had ever looked at her with such raw honesty and emotion. "I am afraid," she whispered. "I have spent so long just trying to survive, trying to stay small and invisible. I do not know how to let someone care about me." "Then let me teach you," Grant said. He lifted her hand and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Let me show you what it is like to be cherished. We can go as slow as you need. I am not going anywhere, Clara. I will wait as long as it takes for you to trust me." Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Grant released her hand and cupped her face gently, brushing away the tears with his thumbs. "Do not cry, sweetheart. You are safe now. You are home." And then, with infinite care, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft and sweet, a question rather than a demand. Clara had been kissed before, rough stolen kisses that left her feeling violated and afraid, but this was different. This was gentle and reverent, as though Grant was offering her something precious. She kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling his heart beating as fast as her own. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I am sorry," Grant said immediately. "That was too forward. I should not have." "No," Clara interrupted. "Do not apologize. I wanted you to kiss me. I have been wanting you to kiss me all week." Grant's face broke into a brilliant smile. "In that case," he said, pulling her closer, "may I kiss you again?" She answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. This kiss was deeper, more confident, and Clara felt something inside her crack open, some frozen place in her heart beginning to thaw. Grant's arms came around her, holding her close but not tight, always giving her the freedom to pull away if she wanted. But she did not want to pull away. For the first time in her life, she wanted to stay exactly where she was, in the arms of a man who made her feel safe and valued and desired in the best possible way. When they finally broke apart, the stars were coming out overhead, pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. Grant kept one arm around her as they walked slowly back toward town, and Clara leaned into his warmth, marveling at how quickly her life had changed. A week ago, she had been terrified and alone, fleeing from everything she knew. Now she was standing under the prairie stars with a man who looked at her like she was something precious, who kissed her like she mattered. "What happens now?" she asked as they reached the boarding house. Grant turned to face her, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Now we see where this goes. I would like to court you properly, Clara Vance. I would like to take you to church on Sundays and out for drives on Saturday afternoons. I would like to get to know everything about you. And when you are ready, when you trust me completely, I would like to ask you to be my wife." The words should have terrified her, but instead they filled her with a warmth that spread from her chest to her fingertips. "I would like that too," she said. Grant kissed her once more, a soft press of lips that held the promise of more to come. Then he stepped back, settling his hat more firmly on his head. "Sweet dreams, Clara. I will see you at church on Sunday. Sweet dreams, Grant." She watched him walk away into the night, then floated up the stairs to her room, feeling like she was living in one of the novels she loved to read. Mrs. Talbot gave her a knowing look when she passed the parlor, but Clara just smiled and continued to her room. That night, she wrote in her journal, "I was kissed tonight by a man who makes me feel safe. I never knew a kiss could be gentle, could be a gift freely given rather than something taken. I am afraid of how much I already care for him, afraid that this happiness is too fragile to last. But I am also, for the first time in my life, allowing myself to hope that maybe my story can have a happy ending after all." The next few weeks fell into a rhythm that felt almost magical. Clara taught her students during the week, pouring her energy into helping them learn and grow. She was good at her job, patient and creative in her methods, and the children responded enthusiastically to her teaching. Parents began to tell her how much their children were learning, how excited they were to come to school each day. On Sundays, Grant accompanied her to church, sitting beside her in the pew with his father on his other side. After the service, they would have dinner with George, and then Grant would drive Clara out to his ranch in the buggy, showing her the land he loved, introducing her to his horses, sharing his dreams for the future. The Fairfield Ranch was a modest operation, several hundred acres of prairie with a creek running through it. Grant ran cattle and bred horses, doing most of the work himself with help from a few hired hands during busy seasons. The house was a sturdy two-story structure that George had built when he first claimed the land, and Grant clearly took pride in maintaining it well. On one of these Sunday visits, about a month after Clara had arrived in Riverside, George pulled her aside while Grant was tending to one of the horses. "I want you to know," the older man said, "that I see how my son looks at you, and I see how you look at him. I have not seen Grant this happy since before his mother died. Whatever happens between you two, I want you to know that you have my blessing." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Fairfield. That means more to me than you know. Call me George," he said with a smile. "I have a feeling we are going to be family soon enough." As September turned to October, the prairie began its transformation into autumn. The grass turned golden, and the trees along the creek burst into shades of red and orange. The air grew cooler, and Clara had to wear a shawl when she walked to school each morning. She and Grant spent every free moment together, learning each other's stories, sharing their dreams and fears. Clara told him about her mother, about growing up in Missouri, about the years of walking on eggshells around her stepfather's temper. Grant held her while she cried, his steady presence giving her permission to finally grieve the childhood she should have had. In return, Grant told her about his mother, how she had died when he was 12, a fever that took her in less than a week. He spoke of the loneliness that followed, of having to grow up fast to help his father keep the ranch running. He told her about the women who had tried to catch his attention over the years, and how none of them had made him feel the way she did. "You make me want to be better," he said one afternoon as they sat by the creek, watching the water flow past. "You make me want to build something lasting, something beautiful. You make me believe in the future." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, breathing in the scent of him, leather and soap, and something uniquely Grant. "You make me believe I am worth loving," she said softly. You make me feel like I matter." "You do matter," Grant said fiercely, turning to cup her face in his hands. "You matter more than anything. I love you, Clara. I have been trying to find the right moment to say it, but I cannot wait any more. I love you with everything in me." Clara felt her breath catch, felt her heart expand with an emotion so big it almost hurt. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think I could ever feel this way about anyone, but I love you, Grant Fairfield. I love you so much it scares me." He kissed her then, deep and thorough, and when they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Grant rested his forehead against hers, his hands gentle on her face. "Marry me," he said. "I know it has not been that long, but I do not need more time to know what I want. I want to wake up beside you every morning. I want to build a life with you, have children with you, grow old with you. Marry me, Clara." Clara pulled back slightly, searching his face. This was everything she had never let herself want, everything she had thought was beyond her reach. And he was offering it to her freely, with open hands and an open heart. "Yes," she said, and then louder, "Yes, I will marry you." Grant let out a whoop of joy and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. When he set her down, he pulled a small box from his pocket. "I have been carrying this around for 2 weeks," he admitted, "just waiting for the courage to ask you properly." Inside the box was a simple gold band with a small diamond, delicate and beautiful. Grant slipped it onto her finger, and Clara stared at it in wonder. "It was my mother's," Grant said. "Pa gave it to me before she died and told me to give it to the woman I wanted to spend my life with. She would have loved you, Clara. She would have been so happy to know you are going to be part of this family." Clara kissed him again, tasting the salt of her own tears on her lips. "When?" she asked. "When can we get married?" "As soon as you want," Grant said. "Tomorrow, if you will have me," Clara laughed. "Let's give it at least a few weeks. I want to do this properly, want your father and the whole town to be there. I want it to be something we remember forever." They decided on a date in late November, just before Thanksgiving. It would give them time to prepare without being too long to wait. As they drove back to town that evening, Clara's hand tucked into Grant's, she could not stop smiling. The ring on her finger caught the last rays of sunlight, winking like a promise. The news of their engagement spread through Riverside like wildfire. By Monday morning, everyone knew, and Clara received congratulations from parents dropping off their children, from people passing her on the street, from Mrs. Talbot who hugged her with genuine joy. "I knew it," the landlady said. "From the first moment I saw you two together, I knew you were meant for each other." The women of the town immediately began planning. There would be a reception at the church hall after the ceremony, and everyone wanted to contribute. Mrs. Granger would make the cake. Mrs. Cole would provide flowers from her greenhouse. The hotel would cater the meal. Clara was overwhelmed by the generosity, by the way this community had embraced her as one of their own. She continued teaching through October and into November, though now her mind often wandered to wedding preparations and the life she would build with Grant. She would move to the ranch after the wedding, would leave the boarding house and the schoolhouse rooms behind. The town council assured her she could continue teaching, that Grant could bring her to town each morning and collect her each afternoon, or she could stay in town during the week if the winter weather made travel difficult. But Clara could not imagine spending nights away from Grant once they were married. They would find a way to make it work, would navigate the practical challenges together. As the wedding date approached, Clara found herself thinking about her mother, wishing she could be there to see her daughter finally happy. One evening, she took out the Bible that had belonged to her mother and opened it to the family record page. Her mother's name was written there in faded ink. Anne Marie Vance, born 1835, died 1865. Clara added her own entry beneath it. Clara Elizabeth Vance married Grant Jacob Fairfield, November 24, 1879. The night before the wedding, Clara could not sleep. She lay in her narrow bed at the boarding house, staring at the ceiling, marveling at how much her life had changed in just 3 months. She had arrived in Riverside broken and scared, running from a past that had offered her nothing but pain. Now she was about to marry a man who loved her, who made her feel safe and cherished and valued. She thought about the moment in the dust storm when Grant had pulled her against his chest and sheltered her with his body. She had not known then that she was being held by the man she would marry, that his arms would become her home. But some part of her heart must have recognized him even in that first moment, must have known that everything was about to change. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, the kind of bright November day where the sun shines but offers little warmth. Clara dressed carefully in a new dress that the women of town had helped her make, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Talbot pinned her hair up and tucked small flowers into the arrangement, then stepped back with tears in her eyes. "You look beautiful, dear. Grant is a lucky man." "I am the lucky one," Clara said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. The church was full when Clara arrived. It seemed like the entire town had turned out to witness the wedding. Reverend Thomas waited at the front beside Grant, who was wearing a new suit and looked so handsome that Clara's breath caught. There was no one to walk her down the aisle, no family to give her away. But as Clara stood at the back of the church, George Fairfield appeared at her side, leaning on his cane. "I would be honored," he said softly, "if you would let me stand in for your father today." Clara felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I would like that very much." She took George's arm, and together they walked slowly down the aisle. Grant's eyes never left her face, and the love she saw there made her feel like she was floating. When they reached the front, George carefully placed her hand in Grant's, then stepped back to take his seat in the front pew. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. Reverend Thomas spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together through both good times and hardships. Clara and Grant exchanged vows, promising to honor and cherish each other all their days. When Grant slipped the wedding band onto her finger, adding to the engagement ring already there, Clara felt something settle deep in her soul, a sense of coming home that she had never experienced before. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thomas said with a smile. Grant pulled Clara close and kissed her thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of the congregation. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning. They walked back down the aisle hand in hand as husband and wife, and Clara felt like her heart might burst with happiness. The reception in the church hall was loud and joyful, full of food and laughter and dancing. Clara was hugged by what felt like every person in town, congratulated and welcomed into the community as Mrs. Grant Fairfield. As the afternoon wore on, Grant pulled her aside. "Are you ready to go home?" he asked, his eyes warm with promise. Home. The word resonated through Clara's entire being. She had a home now, a real home with a man who loved her. "Yes," she said, "I am ready." They said their goodbyes and climbed into the buggy, which had been decorated with ribbons and flowers by well-wishers. As they drove out of town toward the ranch, Clara leaned against Grant's side, his arm around her shoulders. "Happy?" he asked. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she said honestly. The ranch house was warm when they arrived, fires lit in the hearths by George, who had left earlier to give them privacy. A note on the kitchen table said he was staying in town for a few days, letting them have the house to themselves to begin their married life. Grant carried Clara over the threshold, and she laughed at the old tradition. He set her down gently in the front room, then cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, Mrs. Fairfield," he said. "I love you too," Clara whispered. He kissed her softly, then deeper, and Clara felt heat bloom through her body. She had been nervous about this part of marriage, had heard whispered stories about wedding nights that ranged from mildly uncomfortable to traumatic. But as Grant's hands moved gently over her, as he whispered words of love and reassurance, she felt her fear melt away. He was patient and careful, always checking that she was comfortable, that she wanted to continue. And when they finally came together as husband and wife, Clara felt not violated but cherished, not taken but given to, a mutual exchange of love and trust. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Grant's bed, her head on his chest, his fingers running through her unbound hair. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "I am perfect," Clara said, meaning it completely. "I never knew it could be like that it could be so beautiful." Grant pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "It will always be like this between us," he promised. "Always gentle, always loving. I will never hurt you, Clara. I will spend the rest of my life making sure you are happy and safe." She believed him. For the first time in her life, she believed that someone would keep their promises to her, would put her needs and feelings first. They spent the next few days learning each other, adjusting to the rhythms of married life. Clara discovered that Grant sang while he did chores, that he liked his coffee strong and his eggs scrambled. Grant learned that Clara was not a morning person, that she liked to read before bed, that she had a wicked sense of humor once she felt safe enough to show it. George returned after 3 days, and the three of them settled into a comfortable routine. Clara went back to teaching, with Grant driving her to town each morning and collecting her each afternoon. The winter weather was mild that year, making the daily trips manageable. As Christmas approached, Clara felt a contentment she had never experienced. She decorated the ranch house with pine boughs and holly, baked cookies with George's help, and planned a special dinner for the holiday. On Christmas morning, Grant gave her a beautiful shawl he had ordered from a catalog, and she gave him a new saddle blanket she had sewn herself. But the best gift came a few weeks later, in mid-January, when Clara realized her monthly courses had not arrived. She waited another week to be sure, then told Grant one evening as they sat by the fire. "I think I might be expecting a baby," she said, watching his face carefully. Grant's expression transformed from confusion to understanding to pure joy in the space of a heartbeat. He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as though she might break. "A baby," he breathed. "Clara, that is wonderful. Are you happy?" "I am terrified," she admitted. "But yes, I am happy. I want to have your children, Grant. I want to build a family with you." He kissed her tenderly. "You are going to be an amazing mother. Our children are going to be so loved." The pregnancy was not easy. Clara suffered from morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoons, and she had to cut back her teaching to half days. But Grant was attentive and caring, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, sitting with her when she felt unwell, rubbing her feet when they swelled in the summer heat. George was delighted at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. He began building a cradle in his workshop, carefully sanding and finishing the wood until it was smooth as silk. As Clara's belly grew, so did her sense of wonder. She had never thought she would have this, a loving husband and a baby on the way, a home that felt safe and secure. Sometimes, she woke in the night and reached for Grant just to reassure herself that it was real, that she had not dreamed this happiness. The baby was born in late August, a hot afternoon when the cicadas sang in the cottonwood trees. It was a long labor, and there were moments when Clara was sure she could not do it, that the pain would break her. But Grant stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, encouraging her, and when the baby finally emerged with a lusty cry, Clara felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "It is a boy," the doctor announced, placing the squirming infant on Clara's chest. Clara looked down at her son, at his tiny, perfect features and shock of dark hair, and felt tears stream down her face. Grant was crying too, his hand gentle on the baby's head. "He is perfect," Grant whispered. "Clara, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas George Fairfield, after the reverend who had married them and Grant's father. Little Tommy was a good baby, nursing well and sleeping in reasonable stretches. Clara marveled at motherhood, at the overwhelming responsibility and joy of caring for this tiny life. George was besotted with his grandson, holding him whenever Clara would allow it, singing old songs and telling stories to the infant who stared up at him with wide eyes. Clara had to give up teaching for a while to care for Tommy, but she found she did not mind as much as she thought she would. She loved being home with her son, loved watching Grant's face light up when he came in from the fields and saw his family waiting for him. As Tommy grew from infant to toddler, Clara and Grant's love only deepened. They learned to navigate the challenges of parenthood together, supporting each other through sleepless nights and teething pain, and the thousand small worries that come with raising a child. When Tommy was 2, Clara became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she was able to keep teaching almost until her due date. Their second child was born in the spring, a daughter they named Rose Ann, after both of their mothers. Rose was a happy baby with Grant's green eyes and Clara's dark hair. Tommy was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help take care of her, bringing her toys and singing to her when she cried. George's health began to decline when Rose was about a year old. The arthritis that had plagued him for years grew worse, and he spent more and more time resting. But he was still sharp mentally, still told his stories and played with his grandchildren, teaching Tommy to whittle and showing Rose how to feed the chickens. One evening in late autumn, 5 years after Clara had arrived in Riverside, George called Clara and Grant into his room. Tommy and Rose were already asleep, and the house was quiet. "I want to tell you both something," George said, his voice weaker than it used to be but still firm. "Clara, before you came into our lives, I worried about Grant. He was so focused on the ranch, on taking care of me, that he was not taking care of himself. He was not letting himself hope for happiness. But you changed that. You brought joy and love back into this house, and I am so grateful I got to see my son truly happy before I go." "Pa, do not talk like that," Grant said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am not afraid of dying," George said gently. "I have had a good life, and I know I am leaving you in good hands. Clara, you take care of my boy, and Grant, you take care of this family you have built. Make sure these grandchildren of mine know how much I love them." Clara was crying openly now, and Grant was not far behind. They both embraced George carefully, and he held them as best he could. George Fairfield passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks later. The funeral was well attended, with people coming from all over the county to pay their respects to a man who had been a pillar of the community. Clara held Rose while Grant held Tommy, explaining as best he could why Grandpa was not coming back. The grief was heavy, but they bore it together. Grant threw himself into ranch work, and Clara made sure he took time to talk about his feelings, to process the loss of his father. They planted a tree by the creek in George's memory, and sometimes Clara found Grant sitting beneath it, talking to his father as though he was still there. As the years passed, the Fairfield family grew and prospered. Grant expanded the ranch, buying additional land and increasing their herds. Clara went back to teaching part-time once Rose started school, and she loved being able to share her passion for education with her own children as well as the other students. They had 2 more children, another boy named James, and a girl they named Grace. The house was always full of noise and laughter, with children running in and out, horses to be tended, and meals around the big kitchen table that Clara had come to think of as the heart of their home. Clara never forgot where she had come from, the fear and uncertainty that had driven her to Riverside all those years ago. Sometimes she still woke from nightmares about her stepfather, but Grant was always there to hold her, to remind her that she was safe, that she was loved. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Grant took Clara back to the spot where he had first kissed her, by the creek with the prairie stretching out around them. The children were spending the night with friends in town, giving them a rare evening alone. "Do you remember," Grant said, pulling her close, "when I told you that I knew from the moment I held you in that dust storm?" "I remember," Clara said, resting her head on his shoulder. "I thought you were crazy." "Maybe I was," Grant said with a laugh, "but I was right too. You were worth waiting for, worth fighting for. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara Fairfield." "You are my safe place," Clara said softly. "When you wrapped your coat around me and sheltered me from the wind, you gave me something I had never had before. You gave me protection without expectation, kindness without strings attached. You showed me what love was supposed to look like." "I will always be your safe place," Grant promised, "and you will always be my home." They stood together as the sun set over the prairie. Two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life of love and safety and belonging. Clara thought about the frightened woman who had arrived in Riverside 10 years ago, alone and desperate, and marveled at how much had changed. She had a husband who cherished her, 4 beautiful children, a home she loved, and a community that had embraced her as family. She had found her safe place, not just in Grant's arms but in the life they had built together, a life rooted in love and trust, and the knowledge that they would always face whatever came together. As they walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, Clara looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. She thought about her mother, hoped that somehow she knew that her daughter had found happiness, had found the kind of love that heals old wounds and makes new dreams possible. "What are you thinking about?" Grant asked. "Just how lucky I am," Clara said. "How grateful I am that a dust devil blew through town on the day I arrived." Grant laughed and pulled her closer. "Best dust devil I ever met." Inside the house, they built a fire and sat together on the sofa, wrapped in each other's arms, talking and laughing and planning for the future. They spoke about the children's educations, about improvements they wanted to make to the ranch, about growing old together. "I want to travel someday," Clara said. "When the children are grown, I want to see the ocean and the mountains and all the places I have only read about in books." "Then we will," Grant promised. "We will see everything together." The years continued to roll by, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Tommy grew into a young man who loved ranching as much as his father did, often talking about taking over the operation someday. Rose developed a passion for teaching and talked about following in her mother's footsteps. James was the adventurous one, always exploring and asking questions, while Grace was the peacemaker, the one who smoothed over sibling squabbles and made sure everyone felt included. Clara continued teaching until she was almost 50, finally retiring to focus on her growing number of grandchildren. Tommy married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch and gave Clara and Grant 3 grandchildren in quick succession. Rose became a teacher in a larger town 30 miles away, visiting often and bringing stories of her students. Through it all, Clara and Grant's love remained the foundation of everything. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays, weathered illnesses and financial setbacks, and supported each other through every challenge. The ranch remained prosperous, becoming one of the largest operations in the county, and the Fairfield name became synonymous with integrity and hard work. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren in the home where they had built their life together, Clara looked around at the faces she loved and felt overwhelming gratitude. This was the family she had always dreamed of, the safe place she had longed for all those years ago, when she fled Missouri with nothing but a carpet bag and a heart full of fear. Grant caught her eye across the room and smiled, the same smile that had made her heart flutter 40 years ago. He made his way to her side and took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after so many years together. "Happy anniversary, my love," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Happy anniversary," Clara replied. "Thank you for giving me a life I never thought I could have." "Thank you for trusting me enough to accept it," Grant said. "You took a chance on a cowboy who sheltered you from the wind, and you gave me everything I ever wanted in return." As the celebration continued around them, Clara leaned against her husband's shoulder, feeling the same sense of safety and belonging she had felt that very first day when he had pulled her against his chest and turned his back to the storm. She had told him then that she never had a safe place, and he had spent the rest of his life proving to her that she did now, that she always would. The prairie wind still blew outside, wild and free, but inside the Fairfield home there was only warmth and love and the certain knowledge that they had built something lasting, something beautiful, something that would endure for generations to come. And as Clara drifted off to sleep that night, Grant's arms around her the way they had been for 40 years, she thought about the scared young woman who had stumbled into a stranger's arms during a dust storm and found not just shelter from the wind, but shelter from everything that had ever hurt her. She had found her safe place, and it had given her a lifetime of love,